I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. I will note that all board members are present with the exception of Calvin, right? Yep. And there he is. So all board members are present. Morning, Calvin. Morning. So we will start with a report from the secretary. Joe.
Yes, good morning. Pleased to announce that all of the board members have accepted their reappointment for 2019. So great. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you all.
And the purpose of this meeting is to consider the Fowler Fields project. My understanding is the state education department is still reviewing the project as to its cost implications. But last week, the Board of Education decided to go ahead and vote to authorize the additional expenses for the project and to pay that out of local share if necessary.
Okay.
And so this vote today would allow us to instruct the architect to begin the design work on the project and keep us on our current construction schedule. And the program manager is here if you have more detailed questions about the project itself.
Okay, great.
That completes my report.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
So before we entertain the resolution, maybe Chris, if you can just refresh everyone's memory on the scope, and the plan going forward.
Sure. Related to just the site work, or related to the project in general?
The project, everything encompassed within the $31 million.
Sure. So it's basically three components, right? We have the roof replacement, which has been already bid and award,
right, and
will begin in the spring, so that's already under contract. We have the interiors renovation package, which includes the gymnasium and work in the auditorium and some work in the locker rooms. Mm-hmm. So that's the second component. That has not been bid. That is designed. It has not been bid. The intent there was to bid that when we go out with our tranche 2. It will be bid when we do the tranche 2 borrowing. Mm-hmm. So down the line a little bit here. Will be that, and then the site work. So those are the three components that make up the total project budget.
Okay. And the portion of the budget dedicated to the site work now stands at?
The portion of the budget that for the site work at the moment is approximately 18 million. 18 is where we are.
Okay.
18 million is for the field.
What's that?
The 18 million.
Yes.
Is for what?
For the site work, which will include the field, the track, the bleachers, press box, concession storage building, all the work, the tennis courts, all the work related to the exterior of the building for the athletic complex.
And that includes the remediation also?
Yes.
And what's the difference between that figure and trying to differentiate the remediation number? Is that broken down in the?
Our hope with this plan now, or the intent, I don't like the word hope, but the intent with this plan now is that we've virtually almost eliminated the remediation that we would have had to done. And in adopting this different methodology that you heard a lot about in terms of the driving of the piles and pouring of a structural slab, we're going to let the soil that's there that was of concern to remain, so that we've greatly eliminated the need to take that contaminated soil and dispose of it off-site.
So Chris, so this is a total project number, the 18 million?
For the site work portion, correct.
So what was the budgeted site work number before?
Initially, we were down around 13 million, and so this is increased.
So this is $5 million more.
Yeah.
But you're wrapping it all into the 31 million, right?
For the project budget, yes. Ultimately, right, we're going to increase the total project budget over there. Right, we were at 26, and now we're going to add another 5 million to it.
Can I have a brief discussion, Mr. Mayor, on this?
Sure.
Because you know I've been adamantly opposed to that site because I've asked the questions, and we don't know when it's going to resurface. And for you to roll it in here, because yes, I was set to vote no on this, but it has different components added to it. We don't know if 5 years, 10 years down the road, what's going to come back up and if we're going to actually contaminate our children. So I still have a problem with that because we said it might be 5 years, 10 years, the life of the field 15 years, but we don't know. So I'm just stuck because that's a problem for me.
I want to make sure I understand the question. So we talked about a performance metric in terms of mitigating settlement
Mm-hmm.
for a period of about 15 years, right? But that was just with differential settlement. You mentioned the word contamination, and I'm not sure I follow the
So
question.
when you went down and you looked at what was under there,
Correct.
how long is it gonna be again before that resurfaces? Do we know? Do we really have a clear answer on that? Or are we just guesstimating?
So, yeah, well, I'm trying to understand. So the settlement issue, or
Well, I think it would be helpful. So obviously, there's a lot of construction sites with some levels of contamination. There's certain standards for
Sure.
mitigating the risks associated with that contamination. So maybe you can just remind us what those standards are and how we intend to mitigate the risk of soil contamination.
Yeah, the soil that's there will remain,
Correct.
and we're going to essentially encapsulate that.
Right.
So, to my knowledge, we haven't had any discussion about that percolating through or creating a hazard. DEC is aware of what's there.
Right. These are these are DEC standards.
Yeah, there's a whole specification that's been identified. The soil, the mitigation plan that's there, and says this is how what we're doing with the soil that is on site. That's all been vetted through DEC to make sure what we're doing is,
Safe.
in compliance with what they would expect us to do.
Right.
So, but I have no knowledge of that being an issue or of a concern. The performance concern was that we could see some differential settlement at the point of about 15 years out.
But it was a concern because that was when they were doing the testing and we were waiting for the report when I asked that question. So yeah, it is a concern.
So for JSCB Phase 1, we had a fully.
Why don't you come right up to the mic
Sure, I'm
again?
sorry.
Remember, we're on.
Yeah,
we're on
for
video.
JSCB Phase 1, we had to characterize the soil there. We did a bunch of removals. And basically, if we take the soil off-site, it has to be in a special landfill. It's not a hazardous waste, it's more a special waste. And you can get into definitions of this stuff. Leaving it on site is okay, and that we're allowed to have that, use it as fields. Before Chris came aboard, we went through all this with DEC and Phase 1. What we did do is we put down an orange fence, basically a construction fence at a certain layer, and then put new soil over the top to differentiate, so down the road if someone was digging in. So we do not have to, we're not mandated to remove any soil on the project at all. We're allowed to leave the existing soils in place.
Right.
Now, some of the issues that we talked about with Jim Stewart are related to the structural suitability of the soils,
Understood.
what we can build things on. That's where
Yeah.
I think there's some confusion.
Understood. And I don't think Helen's confused. Not to speak for you. I just
Right.
think your point is the soil's still there.
Right.
And understanding it may be in compliance with all rules and regulations. For some, that's still a disconcerting
Very.
feeling.
Sure.
Understood.
So Chris, the structural concern really is related to, was it the peat moss? Is that really kind of what we're saying, that you're gonna leave that in place? Because I know at one point, when they came to talk about the presentation, it was really where some of the peat moss was and whether or not to remove that, because that adds a layer of at least temporary stability to the structure.
Yeah,
Or is it something different?
well, fundamentally, removing it was really never an option because of its depth. So logistically, trying to remove that at 30 some odd feet down wasn't feasible. So then we had talked about different methodologies to try and compress the peat that was there. And so we had initially talked about a concept of putting stone there and letting it sit for a year. And obviously the downside to that is you wait a year for it to do that at a minimum. The current design is to build, and as you saw, to drive wooden piles and essentially build a structural slab on top of those piles. So now you've created a stable platform for anything that you want to build on top of that. Over time, with nature, is that peat moss going to continually to deteriorate and to rot down and eventually result in some settlement? Eventually, yeah. It's inevitable. It's something we can't control. So, but what we've done is we've come up with a performance spec that says this is what we can tolerate in terms of settlement over X period of time, and that's the performance component of what we're going to build out there.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay.
I think, again, Helen, correct me if I'm wrong, but the other concern was that, as you said, Chris, we have three phases, components of the
Correct.
project. And Helen clearly has concerns with the field site component of it. And is there is the resolution crafted in a way that if Helen were to not support the addition of $5 million for the site work, that would have a negative impact on the other components of the project. Is that right?
Right.
Joe?
Well, my understanding is we need the additional $5 million to go ahead with the fields portion.
Understood.
Right.
So if Helen were to not want to support that, would that in any way impede the ability of the other two components of the project to move forward?
No, it would not.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So and I think the confusion was at the end. It references the total project budget going up from 26 to 31, but the $5 million is specific to the site, and this resolution is specific to the $5 million going to support the additional site work.
That's my understanding.
Yeah, the roofing work has already been funded.
Right.
It's already under contract.
Yep.
The interiors has already been budgeted for in the context of the 31 million.
Right.
So if you didn't go forward with the 5 million on the site, it would impact the site
Right. Okay.
only.
It's the, so this is gonna be built to code. Anytime you have environmental issues, anytime you have kids there, the threshold is really high. Does the proposal call for meeting the thresholds? Are you folks looking to exceed the thresholds by doing different and special things to encapsulate that soil?
There's no special means to encapsulate at the moment. I mean, obviously.
So I know encapsulation is putting something over it.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, essentially we're burying. I mean, we're leaving it there. We're not taking it out.
But the code
And-
guidelines would say, I'm making this up, 5 feet. Are you folks saying, since there's, in the state, the federal government's good with 5 feet because you're gonna have kids there? But are we saying we're looking to do 10 feet?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying.
To
Well,
have
we're gonna-
extra due diligence?
I don't know that I could speak a specific metric, but we are gonna evaluate the condition of the soil when we get in there. We'll have somebody on site to monitor. And just to clarify because contamination is a broad term. So what we have there is a couple different pieces. We have a regulated soil, which means it's soil because of the nature of what's in the soil. It has some construction debris in it. It has brick, block, metal, whatever. I can't just take that and take it to John's house because he'd like clean fill. I can't do that. The law says that's a regulated material. It's not a contaminant. Doesn't have harmful chemicals in it.
Not talking
It's
heavy
just
metals here.
regulated. It's a regulated material. Then we did have some spots that tested for some petrochemical, which means we could have some, petrochemical in the soil, which again is something that needs to be dealt with, but it's not anything that's glowing.
Right.
And then we did have some heavy metals that were in there as well. All of which we have a means that if we encounter them of what they have to do with them. That's all been spelled out in terms of how we do it. So we will have some monitoring on site so that if we're digging along and we find an area that we didn't anticipate that to be there, but it is there, we have a means to deal with it.
And Chris, and again, I appreciate that. So I'm gonna restate my question. Are we looking to go above the federal state standards in terms of the encapsulation, remediation?
Calvin, I would have to come back to you if our standards are higher than that. I know our standards are in compliance. I would default to the design professional and the engineer that put that spec together. I can come back to you with that. I understand the question, I understand what you're going for, but I don't have a metric to tell you the 5 or the 10.
And I think it's also important to note that when you're looking at those state and federal standards, they apply to different uses of the property. So there's a higher onus on the project, or a higher bar, if you will, for the higher the intensity of the use. So if it's being used for industrial uses versus being used for, we know that it will be used as a playing field. There are different standards that apply there.
I will say
This
that.
is- yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, I mean, again, I don't mean to be dismissive at all, but this is, working in an urban environment with where most pieces of property have had multiple past uses. These are not new issues that we've dealt with on numerous construction projects, but also specifically school construction projects. All of our school sites have been around for a long time. So again, not being dismissive, just want to keep some broader context on this issue.
And I will just add we have commissioners' regs that are specifically related to school construction that we have to follow, that speaks to separation of students and staff and safety and noise levels and fumes and dust and all that stuff. So, and we do comply with that as well. That's not necessarily specific to site work, but that's a general commissioner regs that we have to comply with for doing work in schools.
And I appreciate the mayor's comments, and just really sensitive to all our buildings, all the kids. There's a heightened sensitivity to just this project and Fowler, all the things that have happened, having remediation done before, having the building settle, having waste go through the building, just sensitive.
Right.
It'd be a hell of a message. We do this, and then 5-10 years down the road, this happens again.
Yeah.
It's just a hell of a message in the community. So, I hear Helen, and again, Mayor, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I appreciate very much what you said. But have something possibly happen to the same school multiple times.
Understood.
Yeah. That would actually be a travesty of injustice. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think we should have heightened sensitivity. I mean, we're talking about our children here, right? And so, I know we're trying to weigh dollars and cents, but we also must weigh with common sense.
Nice.
And I think that, when we take a look at the lead levels, countywide, 2017, 639 in the city. So I think that we have to do our due diligence in making sure that we're not adding to some of those concerns. And so I would, applaud the board in making sure that we have the tough discussion and not letting money sort of erode that vision in terms of the lives and safety of our children long term. So, I think that it's good that we're having this conversation.
Agreed.
I would also, so to go back to on the special school board meeting, so the school board is going to bond this on their own, and this is a question for you, Joe, waiting for the state to approve it?
Well, my understanding is it'll become part of our project budget, and as such, it will be technically local share if the state does not provide aid to it. So in terms of bonding, the Industrial Development Agency will continue to issue the bond for the project, but when it comes to repaying those bonds, a greater proportion of state aid to the district will have to be taken out to make those payments, or funds from their general fund, depending how they want to structure it.
So I heard you.
We're working with the state education for
Heidi.
the MCA. I'm sorry. We're working with the state education for the MCAs to get a final approval for this project.
So I heard it right. I just want to make sure it's clear. I compliment the city, and more importantly, Jaime, you and your administration, and Pat and the board to do that. Again, we talk about commitment. In my mind, that speaks to a very special commitment to that Fowler community, that the city, and particularly the school district and the board, feel so strongly about that community. They're going to take a calculated risk and put additional debt on their books that, quite frankly, school districts struggled financially, the years I was on the board. I say kudos to you and the board for making that vote and making that vote to do that.
Okay.
Mayor, I'll tip my hand. I'm willing to vote in favor of this moving forward. Mr. Williams said it well. There'll be some tough conversations. And I want to, tip my hand. I'm looking to vote to support it and move forward, but I'm not looking to acquiesce.
Yeah.
I hope to still be alive in 10, 15, 20 years. And I don't want anyone pointing their fingers at me saying shame.
Absolutely. Okay, so why don't we, if we can introduce someone, Joe, if you want to introduce the resolution.
Yes.
If we have a motion in a second, we can have some further formal discussion about it, and then we'll take a vote.
Sounds good. So the resolution before you is number 1 of 2019, which would amend our comprehensive plan to reallocate the $5 million in funding out of the unallocated funding that we approved last summer. So we had the extra $8.5 million that was within our state legislation, and through the action of the school board last week, and now this board, we would be taking those unallocated funds and dedicating them to the Fowler project.
Thank you. Before I ask for a motion, I also did want to acknowledge that we do have correspondence here from Mr. Giardine, and we have Mr. Giardine here. So we understand your concerns. We appreciate your passion for our city students and for these issues, and we hear you. Okay, so Joe's introduced the motion. Do we?
I'll move it, Mayor.
Calvin has moved it. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Further discussion. Anyone else want to share their thoughts on it?
It's gonna say, I hope down the road that, as Calvin stated, we're not looking back 15, 20 years from now, coming back saying, oh, by the way, all of this, occurred.
Agreed. Jaime, do you want to add anything before we?
I think again that we have had kids playing in those fields right now for years and years, and that side of town, Fowler High School or PSLA, those students, that community, they need athletic facilities as we have in the other three schools. So
They do, but not to their detriment.
yeah, no, I understand that, and we need to be prudent about this is taxpayers' money. I understand that.
We have struggled with this decision ever since when Calvin was on the board. We were talking about this, and it's been a very difficult decision, and it's difficult to allot $5 million. I mean, because this school district has always struggled financially and continues to do that. But it's very difficult to have parents and children come into the board meetings month after month and talk about how it's not fair to them. When I heard the presentation the other month about the remediation, it was, I have the same concerns as you do about the differential and about what can happen in 15 years. But it's really difficult to deprive our children of an athletic field when they've been asking for it for so long. So I'm just hoping that this will work, and that in 15 years we're not saying, oh, we shouldn't have done it, because I have the same concern. But we have to give these children something.
And I appreciate that. The children do need a field, and I'm just gonna put this in the same category, to the detriment. And this is what I know. Danforth, Blodgett, we're working with asbestos, we're working with lead, so that we continue to just put these kids in harm's way. They do need a field, but not to their detriment. Right. So I'm just gonna say that again.
This is all about risk and reward.
Larry, would you mind speaking into the microphone? I'm going to keep on to you all until you.
This is really about the risk and reward. We want to reward the families and students on that side of town. We know that they deserve the reward.
Yeah.
And part of this is taking the risk of saying, let's do this, and crossing our fingers and hoping that the reward is that we actually didn't substantiate a risk. Yeah. And so I think that we're all on the same page. Yep. We're all cautiously, conscientiously cautious about this. And we do. I mean, a lot of us, we've been saying for years that community deserves the best. Yeah. And for years we've saying they have not had that. So the families, none of us, the school should have never been built there in the first place, if you ask me.
Right.
But it is.
I agree.
And so now we have this. Yeah. And so this is on our watch. Yeah. And we're trying to do the best of our due diligence on our watch. And so at the same time trying to appease, making sure that the families get what they deserve. Yeah. So this is about the risk and reward. I'm willing to take that risk, crossing our fingers and praying that the reward is exactly what it is.
Praying and prayer works, and making these conversations with Turner as well every month, and even some special meetings to ensure we have prayer. But we also are holding folks accountable.
We need to have faith in a number of different ways on this, and the professionals and
my uncle would say, you got to watch out for prayer. You got to open your eyes sometimes, because somebody could come by and knock you in your head. So,
right. No, I really appreciate the comments by everyone. I think, Larry, you really summed it up. There is some risk here, but I think this body has done our due diligence. We've we've pushed our design professionals to get it right, and I know I can speak for myself that I think it's worth the risk for the families on the west side, but I think we're asking all the right questions. So we have a motion, we have a second. Any further discussion? I'm going to call it to vote. All in favor? Aye.
No,
Opposed?
me.
Alan? Motion is
Resolution
carried.
Carried, yeah, 6-1.
6-1. Okay. Any other business to come before the board?
I do not believe so.
Okay, entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.